what's the longest case you've worked on?
Oh, Lord. One of the longest, for sure, was the yogurt shop murders.
I was going to get into that later, but we can
I
get into that
probably
now.
got, golly, more than 10 years of my life tied up in that case.
Now, to talk about that case, if you guys aren't aware, 4 girls, correct? 4
little girls were raped, murdered, i.e. shot, and burned in the yogurt shop. The yogurt shop was set on fire after they were killed, after they were raped.
And this was December 6, 1991?
Yes.
How was the technology back then in terms of what we have now? Was there DNA, fingerprints?
This case, I think, was haunted not so much by technology or the lack of it. It was the mistakes that were made during the preliminary investigation. When the firemen arrived, for example, because it was initially called in as a fire, no one knew there were 4 little girls in there that were dead. People saw the flames. The fire department came, the first responders. They're knocking down the fire, and then they see the first little body lying there on the floor and realize it's a crime scene. The greatest mistake, in my opinion, that was made is that the firemen, using their hoses, basically blew everything that was on the floor out of the back door. They had pictures of it. Then they sacked up everything that had been blown out by the fire hoses. They took pictures of it. There were more than 12 garbage bags. Now, you could call it garbage, but there are many of us who would say it's evidence. God knows what was blown out those back doors. There may have been DNA. There may have been fingerprints. We don't know and we'll never know because they hauled the bags to the city garbage dump and dumped them. About 2 days later, they realized, oh, my God, did we throw evidence away? They went out and searched for them, and they never found them. The result was there was only one piece of physical evidence, one piece of evidence out of that trial. It came out of Amy Ayers' vagina. It was the male DNA for one man, and it's called YSTR. One half of your DNA comes from your mother, one half comes from your father. The YSTR is the male contribution. They had a YSTR sample out of Amy that became his sole and only physical evidence.
And so, just to give people a brief summary, was there 1 or 2 young boys that were charged with this crime?
4 were suspected. 2 are actually charged, Mike Scott and Robert Springsteen, and that's because they both confessed.
Now, was this a confession made without counsel?
It was a confession made without counsel. But if you agree to speak to the police, you have waived your right to have a lawyer present.
So if those individuals that said, I don't feel comfortable speaking with you without counsel, then
it would have been over. But it can be really damning. As you know, if you have become familiar with the Reid technique, Robert Springsteen's confession could be a model for what goes wrong with the Reid technique. And Robert knew he was going to go to death row when they were playing the videotape confession to the jury. You could see the jury's faces hardening as they listened to Robert confessing. And then the very last lines of his confession, the defendant says, "That's not enough, Robert. Tell us what you did. What's the last thing you did to Amy?" And he said, "Okay, I put my dick in her pussy and I fucked her." When that played to the jury, when they heard that line, I'll never forget, Robert leaned over to me and said, "I'm going to death row, aren't I?" And I said, "Yes, Robert, you are."
Now, did he eventually go to death row?
Oh, he spent 2 years on death row before I got it reversed. And then he was in prison longer until I proved to a scientific certainty he could not have raped Amy Ayers, that it was not his DNA, and that's what set him free.
Now, has there been any update to that case in terms of new suspects, or is that a cold case?
Again, no. I'm not the one to answer that because I am not in a position to know If there is an ongoing investigation, if further efforts are being made, that would be a question for the police.
Understood. Now that sounds like to me, based on the research that I did on that case, sounds like it was a life-changing event for these individuals because they were young boys at the time, correct?
It was a life-changing event for almost everyone who had any contact with that case at all. That includes the investigators, the police, the firefighters, the lawyers. Again, damn it, the facts were so ugly, and then you have these confessions, and yeah, there were people who invested themselves in believing those confessions were true, that they were damning, and that they should send those boys to death row.
And how much time did they do in between 1991 and when they were able to be released?
I think Robert did a total of 7 years. I don't know how long Mike Scott was in prison.
Okay.
And part of Robert's time, as you remember, was on death row.
Yes. And while you have a client on death row that you believe is innocent and you have a family and you have other cases, how do you find the time and the will to say, I'm going to make sure that I finish what I started and get this individual out?
As I said, criminal law presents its own challenges. And yeah, you may have multiple cases pending at the same time. Each of them deserves your attention, your professionalism. And if you can't do that, then damn it, you ought not be practicing criminal law.